Star Wars was a phenomenon. On its release in 1977, it smashed box office records, becoming the highest-grossing film of all time and spawning a franchise that has earned billions worldwide. And its script has become equally legendary. It was written by George Lucas over many years and many different drafts with input from many other creative partners, as a self-conscious attempt to create a universal myth that would resonate with audiences everywhere. So incredibly, Lucas envisioned the remarkable feat that his film actually achieved. And for decades, writers have puzzled over how he did it, trying to crack his script's prophetic recipe. Lucas himself credited the influence of Joseph Campbell, who about 25 years earlier had popularized the theory of the monomyth. Campbell had studied the myths of dozens of ancient cultures and arrived at the conclusion that they were all faces of the same primordial myth. Campbell called this myth the hero's journey, which he defined in intricate detail as a journey where a hero is called across a threshold into the unknown, is helped through trials and temptations, then undergoes death, atonement, rebirth, revelation, and finally battles his way back to the known world. And to explain how cultures who'd never interacted could all have arrived at this complex, multi-stage story as the basis for their deepest spiritual teachings, Campbell adopted Carl Jung's view that all human brains shared a deep story language made up of universal archetypes. These archetypes, Campbell claimed, were the eternal stuff of myth, allowing each ancient culture to look inside their minds and arrive independently at the same universal narrative. Lucas was deeply impressed by Campbell's teachings, and the enormous success of Star Wars has led many, many other filmmakers to treat Campbell's teachings with high reverence too. In fact, to the extent that there's a dominant theory about screenwriting in Hollywood today, it's the theory of the hero's journey. Yet, despite the enormous influence of the concept of the hero's journey, it hasn't managed to live up to its promise. Hollywood has commissioned thousands of hero's journey films, most of which have failed, and none of which have repeated the miracle feat of Star Wars. And amateur writers have produced millions of hero's journey scripts, almost all of which have vanished without a sound. So what's going on? How is it a secret formula if it doesn't work? Well, for starters, everything about Campbell's theory has been debunked by modern neuroscientists. There are no eternal archetypes in the human mind. Nor are there universal myths shared by all human cultures. Anthropologists and folklorists and literary scholars have shown that there's enormous variety in the stories that different cultures tell, and like every form of life on our planet, these stories are branching and evolving all the time. So there is no monomyth. There is no universal hero's journey. Yet even so, there remains the undeniable fact that Lucas set out to create a global story and succeeded. So how did he do it? What was his secret? In this lecture, we'll unravel that mystery so you can incorporate it into your next script. Because although the theory of the hero's journey is a fable, the belief that you can craft a blockbuster script is not. Following our usual method of reverse engineering, let's begin by turning to the end of Star Wars and asking ourselves, what's its cognitive effect? So if you're one of the last rebel holdouts not to see Star Wars, now's the time to hit pause and do it. At the end of Star Wars, Luke Skywalker manages to save the Rebel Alliance from the evil Galactic Empire by destroying the Death Star. As the script tells us, the Death Star bursts into a supernova, creating a spectacular heavenly display. So words like supernova and spectacular tell us that this ending is a moment of wonder. And another word in this description specifically defines the quality of the wonder. That word is heavenly. Heavenly. That's a higher kind of wonder, a sacred, otherworldly kind of wonder. And everything about the ending of Star Wars has this spiritual feel. The Death Star's nirvanic explosion is achieved through Luke's use of the Force, the mystic power that unites the cosmos and miraculously resurrects Obi-Wan to help the final kill shot. So what enables Luke to destroy the Death Star isn't a new sci-fi weapon or technology, nor is it Luke's heroic human qualities, like his courage or his determination, which many of the other rebels possess as well. No, what allows Luke to succeed is an immaterial power, a force greater than science and human nature and the rest of the physical world. This spiritual feeling is relentlessly emphasized in the final scene of the script. After Han Solo returns from helping Luke, Leia praises him for having left behind his crude materialism. "I knew there was more to you than money." Then, Han and Luke embrace, putting aside their romantic competition over Leia to display a brotherly love. And even the robots get in on the spiritual experience. When C-3PO sees the wounded R2-D2, he offers his own body in sacrifice. "Sir, if any of my circuits or gears will help, I'll gladly donate them." This turn towards the spiritual is the distinct cognitive effect of Star Wars. The ending of the script encourages us to look beyond earthly materialism, to believe that the dead can return, that we can sacrifice our lives for something bigger, that there is a heavenly wonder beyond. So the cognitive ambition of the script isn't just to amaze us with Hollywood pyrotechnics. It's to trigger a sense of spiritual awakening. Seems ambitious, I know, but Lucas knew it was possible because he had felt a heavenly wonder at the movies before. A long, long time ago, back when Lucas was a child, he had gazed up from the darkness of a movie theater at a black and white science fiction epic on the silver screen, and he had caught sight of realms that existed beyond this earth, opening his eyes in otherworldly awe. And as Lucas got older, he yearned to recreate the spiritual experience of being a child at the movies. Because when he looked around the later films of his adult life, he couldn't find heavenly wonder anywhere. Instead, the films of the 1970s seemed the products of a fallen earth. They were tawdry and unbelievable. They focused too much on worldly things like sex and money. So Lucas set out to bring back the big wonder he had felt as a child, to create a spiritual awakening in his generation, restoring their sense of the deep awe of the cosmos. This is the cognitive effect that the script of Star Wars generates. The technical, psychological term for it is religious experience, but we can also call it spiritual awe, or big wonder. So how does the script for Star Wars create this extraordinary cognitive effect? How does a story about gunships and aliens make us feel in the presence of heaven? As we've seen, most subsequent Hollywood execs and screenwriters have located the secret to Star Wars in the plot and the characters that Lucas borrowed from Campbell's hero's journey. But science reveals that the success of Star Wars is due to a different story element than plot or character. That story element is tone. And so unlike in our other lectures, we'll discuss tone first, devoting most of our attention to it, and touching more briefly on Star Wars' story world, character, and plot at the end. Why is tone so important for creating Star Wars' cognitive effect of big wonder? Well, psychologists have been studying spiritual experience ever since William James published The Varieties of Religious Experience in 1902. And that research has revealed that spiritual experience is rooted in a way of perceiving the world. It's rooted, that is, in a way of seeing. When you have a spiritual experience, you suddenly feel like you can see the eternal in the everyday. Regular daily objects take on a higher meaning, becoming windows into a greater truth. Another way of saying this is that to the holy, all things appear holy. A spiritual person can see spirit everywhere, even in the ugliest things. And conversely, any object, no matter how holy its origins, can seem cheap or ridiculous if looked upon by a skeptic. So how do we learn to see with holy eyes? Well, people have discovered spiritual awe in many different kinds of sacred rituals and scriptures, and they've also found it in art, in stories, and perhaps most notoriously in the psychedelic drugs that helped fuel the mysticism of the 1960s and the 1970s, when Lucas and his original audience were growing up. A movie script is not a psychedelic, but it too can change our perception of the world. Scripts do this through their use of tone, which, as we saw back in our introductory lectures, is the screenwriter's equivalent of the camera lens. Tone is what tells the reader how to look, how to see the story world. It can tell us to see a man as fallen, or it can tell us to see the explosion of a Death Star as a window into Shangri-La. And the script for Star Wars uses its opening lines to tell us exactly how it wants us to see. A long, long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a vast sea of stars serves as the backdrop for the main title. War drums echo through the heavens as a roll-up slowly crawls into infinity. It is a period of civil war. Rebel spaceships, striking from a hidden base, have won their first victory against the evil Galactic Empire. During the battle, rebel spies managed to steal secret plans to the Empire's ultimate weapon, the Death Star, an armored space station with enough power to destroy an entire planet. Pursued by the Empire's sinister agents, Princess Leia races home aboard her starship, custodian of the stolen plans that can save her people and restore freedom to the galaxy. This crawl is so iconic that it seems the very essence of Star Wars, but Lucas in fact borrowed it from somewhere else. Specifically, he borrowed it from his favorite childhood movie, the movie that most made him feel a sense of spiritual awe. That movie was the 1940 serial Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe. Episode 2 of Flash Gordon also begins with a crawl of words, and here's how it goes. Following the wake of dictators, war and the rumors of war, a ravaging plague, the Purple Death, strikes the Earth. Flash Gordon and Professor Zarkov, believing Ming the Merciless is behind the Purple Death, start with Dale Arden in Zarkov's rocket ship, Firmongo. So you can immediately see all the things that Lucas borrowed. In Star Wars, there's the Death Star. In Flash Gordon, the Purple Death. In Star Wars, a period of civil war. In Flash Gordon, war and the rumors of war. In Star Wars, there's the beautiful Princess Leia in her starship. In Flash Gordon, there's the beautiful Dale Arden in her rocket ship. So the world and the plot and the characters of Star Wars are similar, and in some cases almost identical to Flash Gordon. But one crucial element of the story is different: the tone. When Lucas saw Flash Gordon as a child, it inspired an enormous sense of wonder. But when he went back and rewatched it later as a child, the film seemed cheap and a little ridiculous. So what Lucas did was take the pulp details of Flash Gordon and invest them with a heightened mythic tone, recreating the big awe that he felt as a child. Here are 3 ways he does that in Star Wars' opening crawl. First, instead of setting his story in Flash Gordon's sci-fi future, Lucas sets it in the long ago past, instantly giving the plot a mythic feel. Star Wars isn't an imaginary future. It's a true, forgotten past. It really happened long ago. Second, Lucas distills the idiosyncratic details of Flash Gordon into simpler, more general concepts. So instead of Ming the Merciless, we have the Empire. Instead of Mongo, we have home. None of us has ever seen a Ming the Merciless or a planet Mongo, but we know what an empire is, and we know how it feels to want to go home. And the third technique that Lucas uses in the opening crawl to create a mythic sense of tone is to invest everything with a sense of bigness. The script tells us that the words pass over a vast sea of stars, that drums echo through the heavens, and that the words disappear into infinity. This sense of bigness is the primordial feeling of spiritual awakening, of seeing something so vast that it exceeds our ability to count. By stretching our minds beyond what we can comprehend, it alerts us to a realm of existence beyond. Most of us automatically get this experience when we contemplate the hugeness of space. And that's why both astronomy and science fiction are so powerful at generating big wonder. And it's why Lucas's title fuses astronomy and sci-fi by combining stars and wars. So those are the 3 things that Lucas does to invest the old story and characters of Flash Gordon with a new tone of spiritual awe. First, he sets them far in the past, making them an ancient myth. Second, he uses common abstract nouns like home and war to create a sense of cosmic connectedness. Third, he uses the bigness of space to create a sense of heavenly infinity. So ancientness of time, generalness of language, bigness of space, these are the 3 key ingredients of the script's tone, and they've all been linked by modern neuroscience to forms of spiritual experience. But by themselves, these ingredients are not enough alone to create a spiritual experience. they also require the story elements of Flash Gordon. Not because the story elements of Flash Gordon are mythic, but because they're the opposite. They're the everyday. To experience spiritual awakening, you need to suddenly perceive the eternal in the worldly objects of life. And Flash Gordon is about as worldly as you can get. It's a cliched pulp story, the kind that you can find in a zillion dime store novels. So what the script of Star Wars does is use this worldly tale as a gateway into the mystic beyond. It takes the story world and the characters and the plot of Flash Gordon, which are rich with pulp narrative devices for creating suspense and romance and other primal earthly literary experiences. And it blends these pulp hooks with a tone of ancientness, generalness, and vastness, making the crude physical delights of pulp fiction seem mythic and eternal. Take the character of Princess Leia. She gets her name from Princess Dea, a character in the Edgar Rice Burroughs serial John Carter of Mars that inspired Flash Gordon. And exactly like the female lead of Flash Gordon, Leia is a beautiful but tough female fighter. But the script for Star Wars then takes these pulp elements and invests them with a spiritual tone by having Leia embody what Lucas saw as the four ancient, general, and vast qualities of all women: mistress, sister, mother, bride. So Leia is the mistress of Han, she's the sister of Luke, she's the maternal protector of Alderaan, and she's married to the rebel cause. Mistress, sister, mother, bride. That's why there aren't any other women in the script. In Lucas's mind, Leia was them all. Now, you may or may not agree with Lucas about women, but for the purposes of learning his blueprint, the important thing is his technique. He took a pulp character and made it feel more ancient, general, and vast. Same with Han Solo. His origin is the rakish espionage agent Napoleon Solo from the 1960s TV show The Man from U.N.C.L.E. Just like Napoleon Solo, Han is a charming, laid-back ladies' man who lies and fights with equal grace. But Star Wars also invests Han with his own general and everywhere qualities. Like most of George Lucas's 1970s audience, Han is too worldly wise to believe in mystic mumbo-jumbo like the Force. And so instead of just being a rakish cynic, Han is also a literary everyman, the imagined embodiment of our modernity. Every beat of Star Wars follows this same method of generating spiritual experience by taking the pulp worlds and characters and plots of Lucas's childhood and making them seem ancient, general, and omnipresent. So if you want to write another Star Wars, that's the recipe. Take a piece of ordinary pulp fiction that taps into the most worldly parts of our brains, grabbing us with a visceral promise of romance and suspense, lust and adventure, sex and violence. And then invest your script with a spiritual tone so that your audience's pursuit of fleshly things becomes a gateway into a higher beyond. Because the special ingredient of Star Wars is its tone, we'll touch more briefly on its other story elements, beginning with its story world. Star Wars opens on a chase scene that crisply reveals the story world's core rule of action. A tiny silver spacecraft, a rebel blockade runner firing lasers from the back of the ship, races through space. It's pursued by a giant Imperial Star Destroyer. Hundreds of deadly laser bolts streak from the Imperial Star Destroyer, causing the main solar fin of the rebel craft to disintegrate. Here, a giant Imperial ship, so massive that it's earned the name Star Destroyer, attacks a tiny rebel spacecraft that's designed not to fight, but to flee. So simply and visually, the opening vignette tells us the world of the story is governed by power. The Empire is bigger than everyone else, and it uses its power not to protect the weak, but to crush them. That's the big rule that defines the story world of Star Wars. The rule of power. The rule that might makes right. In conflict with this story world are the film's three main characters, Luke, Leia, and Han. Since we've already touched on Leia and Han, here's how Luke is introduced. A light wind whips at him as he adjusts several valves on a large battered moisture vaporator, which sticks out of the desert floor much like an oil pipe with valves. So our first glimpse of Luke is as a kind of repairman, someone who services other things. And the particular thing that the script shows Luke servicing isn't mighty and impressive. It's an old bit of equipment on some outback farm. So that's how the script establishes Luke as the opposite of the Empire. The Empire lords over everyone. Luke modestly bends down to help, revealing that the central conflict of the movie will be a battle between imperial dominion and humble self-sacrifice, between a world that seeks to control others and a character who wants to set them free. The script is equally efficient in its introduction of the main antagonist, Darth Vader. The awesome, 7-foot-tall Dark Lord of the Sith makes his way into the blinding light of the main passageway. Everyone instinctively backs away from the imposing warrior, and a deathly quiet sweeps through the rebel troops. Several of the rebel troops break and run in a frenzied panic. So Vader is the human equivalent of the Star Destroyer. He embodies power with his sheer size. And so like all antagonists, he's the embodiment of the story world's central rule. So that's how Star Wars introduces story world and character in conflict. If you go back and watch Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe, you'll see the same conflict between the domineering Ming the Merciless, who literally calls himself the Universe, and the self-sacrificing main characters, Flash Gordon, Dale Arden, and Dr. Zarkov. And you might be curious to know that the good doctor's original first name is Hans. A vast amount has been written on the plot of Star Wars, and the more you dig into the details, the more confusing it can get. There are some major story points that match Campbell's narrative of the hero's journey. For example, Luke's refusal of the call when he initially refuses to learn from Obi-Wan. But the script also ignores many stages of the hero's journey and draws heavily on other sources, like Akira Kurosawa's 1958 peasant princess adventure, The Hidden Fortress, and on Flash Gordon, which begins with a death ship that's been sent to kill a whole planet and draws to a close when the hero pilots his ship into the enemy fortress, exploding it. So let's get some quick clarity by stepping back from the details to reclaim the big picture. To start with, remember that Star Wars is a serial. Like Flash Gordon, which was released in 12 different episodes, Star Wars was not meant to be a standalone film. It was supposed to have multiple serial episodes, like a TV show, and like Flash Gordon and other TV shows, Star Wars doesn't have one single hero. It has 3 heroes, Luke, Leia, and Han. So if you want to recreate the plot of Star Wars, you start by sequentially introducing 3 heroes. Don't write a script about a single hero on a journey. It will come off flat in one note. And it'll miss out on one of the major reasons that Star Wars was such a blockbuster, which is that each of its 3 heroes appeals to a different audience. Some people connect more to Leia, some more to Luke, some more to Han. And if you want to replicate the huge popularity of Star Wars, you'll find it helps to have your 3 main characters appeal in different ways. Make one who's more sublimely inspiring, like Leia, one who's more modestly humble, like Luke, and one who's more roguishly charming, like Han. And take the time to give each character their own introduction, geared to their own special cognitive appeal. So you introduce your Leia in scenes of proud defiance that create awe, your Luke in soliloquy scenes of vacillation back and forth that create sympathy, and your Han in lightly ironic scenes that charm. Okay, so now that you've introduced your 3 different heroes, each compelling in their own cognitive way, what do you do with them? Well, as we touched on before, you can take your lead from any of your favorite pulp plots with one crucial additional plot point. To generate an experience of spiritual awakening, your plot needs to make the audience look at the same thing twice. The first time, the thing will seem familiar, regular, worldly. The second time, it will brim with a higher meaning. In plot terms, this means that the story should be reverse engineered as a giant loop, ending on a sacred return to a place that had previously embodied the regular rule of the story world. which is exactly what happens in the heavenly moment at the end of Star Wars when Luke returns in his X-Wing to the Death Star that he'd previously escaped in the Millennium Falcon. So if you want to craft a plot that creates big wonder, build it in the form of a giant story loop. This loop doesn't have to bring your heroes back home, as Campbell suggests in his account of the hero's journey. In Star Wars, the return is to the Death Star, because that's the place that most embodies the core rule of the story world, the imperial rule of might makes right. And in your own script, you can similarly choose any point to begin and end your story loop, because the important thing is simply to bring your audience back to an ordinary place that they can re-experience with new spiritual belief. So if you want to recreate Star Wars' cognitive effect of big wonder, that's the crucial plot structure. Introduce 3 different main characters sequentially, have them meet for the first time in a place that embodies the ordinary rule of the story world, and then have the plot be a big loop back to that ordinary place, which your heroes now transform into a site of heavenly wonder. Now that we've reverse engineered the nuts and bolts of Star Wars' story world, character, plot, and tone, let's flesh out the script's blueprint for big wonder by looking at one of its key scenes in more detail. As we've seen, the secret to creating big wonder in the minds of an audience is to lead them through their own conversion experience, which occurs in Star Wars when the audience sees the resurrection of Obi-Wan and the heavenly Death Star explosion. But if you pulled this sequence out of the movie and showed it to an audience, it would not convert anyone. Our brains have to be prepared for belief, and the crucial step in preparing the brain to believe something new is to create doubt about whatever it believed before. In the case of Star Wars, this means that the jaded, grown-up 1970s part of the audience's brain needs to be cast into doubt. And although Star Wars has a number of scenes that do this, the most critical part of the process occurs in the Millennium Falcon scene where Luke learns to find the Force. Luke is training with his lightsaber when Obi-Wan almost faints from what he calls a great disturbance in the Force, as if millions of voices suddenly cried out in terror and were suddenly silenced. With this beat, the scene reestablishes the dramatic stakes by refreshing the core rule of the story world, reminding the audience of an imperial power that can kill millions in an instant. This tremendous imperial menace in turn prompts an urgent question. How are the characters supposed to defeat the Empire? At which point, the script provides its best answer in the form of Obi-Wan, who, when he manages to recover, solemnly informs Luke that the path to victory is to join with the Jedi and believe in the Force. That mysterious power that Obi-Wan has earlier described as an energy field created by all living things that surrounds us and penetrates us and binds the galaxy together. If you just stepped into a movie theater in 1977 and had never heard of the Force before, you'd think that this was pretty hokey, New Age stuff. A cheesy, half-baked spiritualism totally at odds with the darker, skeptical, post-Vietnam ethos of the 1975 Oscar winner, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and the 1976 Cannes Film Festival winner, Taxi Driver. And the script for Star Wars knows that its audience thinks it's being hokey, so it introduces a clever device to ease you out of your skepticism, which is to insert Han Solo into this scene to explicitly call out the Force for being a, quote, hokey religion. In other words, the scene anticipates its audience objections by writing these objections into the script, which has the cognitive effect of making us in the audience drop our guard. We don't have to be our skeptical grown-up selves, because that self is already in the scene. Then the scene takes the next step towards lifting us out of our skepticism by illustrating the uglier side of being a skeptic. It notes that Han Solo has an air of, quote, smugness, which is not a great look, and when Luke can't find the Force, he flails around, quote, blindly with his lightsaber, which isn't a great look either. What the script does, in effect, is act as a mirror for the audience's jaded unbelief. As we saw in our introductory lectures, one powerful way to convert characters is to show them a mirror. And Star Wars extends this long-standing screenwriting trick to show us the fruits of our own skepticism. Reflecting back our unbelief, the scene dramatizes the unattractive results of growing cynical. Until, in the last beats of the scene, Luke lets go of his own doubts and suddenly succeeds, making us wonder if we could be like him if we stopped being so 1970s smug and gave belief a chance. And so the big trick to learn here is that if you want to convert your audience to Big Wonder at the end of your script, reverse engineer an earlier scene that operates as a mirror to their own skepticism. In that earlier scene, use a character like Han to voice the audience's own doubts, giving your audience to both drop their defenses and see the less appealing qualities of those doubts. And then end that earlier scene with a quick pivot that illustrates the promised land of belief, showing your audience what they're missing and preparing them for the later story beat where you convert them into the Big Wonder of full belief. So that's the blueprint for Star Wars. And you can see why its deep secret is not Joseph Campbell's plot about a hero who undergoes a journey into spiritual awakening. First, the blueprint for Star Wars requires multiple serial heroes. Second, the crucial journey into spiritual awakening is the one taken by the audience. And to convey the audience, Star Wars uses two critical story elements that aren't in Campbell's plot. The first element is a character who embodies the audience's own skepticism. And the second, and even more important element, is the script's tone. Because tone is so crucial that the narrators of spiritual texts can elicit Big Wonder without plots or characters at all. So if you want to inspire Big Wonder with your next script, focus on the tone. Grab some ordinary characters from our fallen world or your favorite Pulp Fiction serial, and then take them on a story loop that you imbue with the heightened tone of spiritual experience, making the worldly seem ancient, interconnected, and vast. So that in the explosion of a hokey sci-fi space fortress, you reveal a glimpse of heaven. To get started on your own Star Wars, here's a couple exercises you can try. First, invest one of your favorite childhood stories with mythic power by setting it in a distant past, by describing its characters and setting in more general words, and by investing it with a cosmic vastness and interconnectedness. Second, to practice your God's eye tone, describe the same object or place in that story from two different sets of eyes, one skeptical and one spiritual, so that when your audience reads the descriptions back to back, they're awoken into Big Wonder.